Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third and last of our academic publishing webinar series this year. Just a quick reminder that we had our first one in April this year, and we had the pleasure to host Professor Pat Thompson from the University of Nottingham. Our second was in June with Dr. Atla Gupta from the University of Southampton. And today we're having an excellent close to our 2021 webinar series on academic publishing with Dr. Sin-Wang Chong. So let me start by introducing myself. This is Jihan Ismail, and I'm one of the ECR network conveners. I'm an associate lecturer at Oxford Brookes University and a final year PhD student at the University of Bath. I am also an assistant reviews editor for the Journal of Critical Studies in Teaching and Learning. So today I have the pleasure to chair this session, and would also like to take the chance to encourage you to listen to our previous sessions on this webinar series. So this is from me today. So I think, should we go to our speaker today, I think? Today, we're happy to be joined by Dr. Sin-Wang Chong, who is a House member, being one of the ECR conveners from this September. But academically, Dr. Sin-Wang Chong is a lecturer, assistant professor in TESOL in the School of Social Sciences, Education and Social Work at Queen's University Belfast, and a researcher at the Research Institute for Learner Autonomy Education at Kanda University of International Studies in Japan. Our guest speaker has a wonderful record in publications which developed since 2016, I think. He has served as a reviewer for over 20 international refereed journals and conferences in language, education, higher education, and related areas. Sin-Wang is also an editor of the Education and Language section of Elsevier Encyclopedia of Language and Linguistics, an associate editor of 2 journals published by Taylor and Francis, which are the Higher Education Research and Development and also Innovation in Language Learning and Teaching. So should I give you the floor then, Sin-Wang? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jihan. Thank you for the very, very nice introduction. Let me just share my screen first. Okay, so for those who are in this event, can you please just type in the chat whether you can see my first slide, navigating peer reviewing for academic journals, and whether you can see my fades, and as well we can test the Q&A session, Q&A function of the app or the platform. You can let me know. Thank you very much, Rob. Yes. Very quick response. Thank you very much. I guess others are okay as well. All right. All right, so thank you very much for joining this session on navigating peer reviewing for academic journals. From what I read on the attendance list, I can see over 100 people attending or registered for this event coming from different parts of the world. Most of you are based in the UK, but I'll also see attendees from China, from the United States and elsewhere. So it's a pretty international community that we have this afternoon, sorry. So I hope to discuss this issue that is related to academics around the world, especially for early career researchers or doctoral students who may not have a lot of experience going through the process, because this is one of the things in academia which people don't really talk about explicitly, maybe because of the double-blind nature of peer review in the field of education. But it's something that early career researchers, including myself, are kind of expected to master without being taught how to do that properly. So I think this is a topic that is very important. I have been doing talks and seminars and workshops on this topic for different organizations, different universities, and it is still one of the important topics, one of the topics that are very, very well attended. So this is what I would like to share with you today about academic journals peer review. Specifically, I will start by talking about what journal peer review is, but this will be a very short session, short part, because this is not something that we don't know. It's something that we know, but I think it's the way that we can go about doing or experiencing or being a part of the peer review process that attracted your attention to attend this session. And then the second part of my talk, I would like to highlight the messiness in journal peer review. And I think it is not a word that people like a lot. It's not a positive word, and it's definitely not a word that we want to associate with journal peer review, because it's such an important process in academia. And sometimes, a lot of the time, it's high stakes for researchers. We don't want the process to be described as messy. We want it to be very structured, very fair, very systematic. It is to a certain extent, but I would like to just highlight the messy aspect of it. And then the major part of this talk is to show you, not tell you, how we can navigate journal peer review. And I've been thinking about how to do this best, because I've been giving talks on the same topic, and every time I try to do it a little bit differently and to see how I can benefit the audience the most. And this time, because the key word here is navigate, so it's an action verb here. So instead of telling you what you can do, I would like to share with you different scenarios. I have prepared 22 vignettes that you may or may have experienced in journal peer review, and we will have a discussion on how we will deal with the scenarios so that we will, go through the process together, sort of 22 scenarios, taking on the roles of authors, peer reviewers, and sometimes editors. So I hope you will find this approach useful at the end of the talk, because I talk about messiness and I talk about navigation. So I think the best approach for us to do it is to really talk about case studies. A little bit about journal peer review. What is journal peer review? Peer review is an important mechanism. It serves an important function to academia and to journals, because peer reviewers are gatekeepers for the journals, ensure the quality of the manuscripts and the publications. But at the same time, journal peer review also serves social functions. It's not just the technicality. It's not just about our expert knowledge or research insights. It's also a social activity, because there are interactions throughout the peer review process, interactions between editors and authors, between editors and reviewers, between reviewers and authors, etc. So it's very important for us to think about peer review as a social process. And I would say it's precisely because it's a social process that makes journal peer review sometimes a little bit messy and problematic. And then also, it's quite interesting to think about journal peer reviewers, right? The people very heavily involved, very dedicated people who devote their time for free to read our works and to offer useful feedback. But I'm sure you're aware, you have heard from your supervisors or your colleagues or from Twitter or elsewhere that sometimes the experience with peer reviewers is not always positive. So in this particular publication, the author described one of the participants' experiences. And the participant said, "I hate peer reviewers. They take my slow food that I have worked painstakingly on for months or years, and they consume it like fast food." This is, I think, an interview from an interview with a participant in this study. I'm not going to comment on this, but I just want to show you that there are pros and cons. There are positive and negative experiences in journal peer review. And that's why people love to hear more about it, how to deal with both pleasant and not so pleasant situations. At the same time, another area that we may talk about in journal peer review is the notion of quality, the notion of standards. When reviewers comment or give feedback on manuscripts, what sort of standards are they following? Are there very specific guidelines on the journals to guide the reviewers how to give comment? Are there checklists, for example, to showcase the criteria valued by the journal? So sometimes it's not very clear, even though you can see the scope, the requirements on the journal's websites, but what constitutes good and bad manuscripts? Sometimes it's not very clear to the authors, and peer reviewers, being researchers themselves, they have their own standard of evaluating a piece of research, right? So it may create problem because of the different orientations, different research experiences. At the same time, there's also a lack of standard in good or bad reviewers' reports, right? It seems like we are never taught how to give feedback to authors as peer reviewers. It's just something that we have to do or we are expected to do, but we're never told how to do it well. At the same time, related to what I just said, there is insufficient training for peer reviewers. There may be some training on the job when you are doing reviews. Maybe you have a more senior reviewer or an editorial board member guiding you through the process, or your supervisor. A lot of time, I would say, especially for doctoral students and early career researchers, when you received an invitation, you're flattered, you're excited, but then you feel like you don't want to accept because you feel that you are not equipped to complete such a task, such a high stakes task. So training is very important. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, peer review is a social process. It entails communications between different stakeholders in the peer review process. And when we talk about communication, we talk about perceptions, we talk about our viewpoints, we talk about emotions. So all of the above, I think, make the journal peer review process very messy. And to further illustrate the messiness of journal peer review, I would like to share with you my recent experience as an author. So I was the author in this situation. I would like to share with you my story, and I would like you to see what I meant by messiness in peer review. So I submitted an article together with one of my colleagues to a highly reputable journal in my own field. And then we received 3 favorable reviewers' reports. So the editors sent it out to 3 reviewers. All of them said there is good potential, there are things to be changed, but overall it's good. And then we revised and we submitted the manuscript to the journal. And then the editors sent it out to another, to 3 reviewers, and 2 of them are new reviewers. So you can see reviewers 2, 4, 5. So reviewer 2 is one of the original reviewers. Reviewers 4 and 5, they are new reviewers. And then reviewer 2 came back and said, yeah, I was pleased with the changes and accept Okay, and the reviewer 4 included some pretty rude and unprofessional comments, which I'm not going to share with you here because it's not very pleasant. Reviewer 5 said major changes need to be made in some new areas that were never mentioned by the first 3 reviewers. Okay, and then I was very confused because it isn't usually how things are done, because number one, it's the first round of review is quite favorable, so there may be no need to send it out to another group of new reviewers. So I discussed with my co-author, and my co-author is a senior academic, and he decided to write an email to the editor to ask for explanations why is it necessary to send it out to 3 additional reviewers. And we received the editor's reply saying that this is basically his or her editing style. Okay, I'm just describing the process. I'm not going to comment at this stage. And then my co-author insisted on an explanation because my co-author, as I said, is a senior academic, and he is also an editor of a journal. So he knows the process very, very well. And then in response to our email queries, the editor has decided to ask another editor to give us feedback. And he said that these comments from the editor could replace the second round of reviewer feedback. And the editor was actually suggesting some minor changes. And then finally, the article was accepted and published. So again, I'm not here to point fingers. I'm not here to say what the problems are. I think it's a very, very good example to illustrate, as a matter of fact, what is meant by messiness in journal peer review. And if you are not prepared, you will be pretty exhausted. You will feel very, very exhausted and frustrated sometimes. Another experience, just to share with you one more example before we go into the scenarios. So I submitted a manuscript to another journal in February, and then we waited for almost 4 months, but the manuscript was still not sent out for review. So it was not rejected, it was not desk rejected, but it wasn't sent out for review. And then we decided to publish a preprint because it's something that we think needs to be out there, and we don't want to wait. So according to the journal policy, yes, we can do that. So we publish a preprint. And then again, my co-author, again, a senior academic, wrote to the editor, and the editor replied by saying that, don't worry about it, the manuscript was being handled, but then it was not. And then surprisingly, we found that there was a new editor in post in July 2021. And then our manuscript was under review in August 2021, and now it's still under review. So that's another experience, just to show you that peer review experience is not so simple and straightforward. So what is journal peer review to me? I think journal peer review is a process. Of course, it's a technical process. It's also a very emotional, taxing process. It's definitely a collaborative process because it involves different people. It's a high stakes process, especially to authors. But more importantly, I think something that we need to bear in mind is it's also a learning process if it is done well. So because of the above, the experiences that I shared, the nature of peer review that I shared, my conclusion and my message at this point is journal peer review is a messy process. That's why people like to talk about it. That's why people like to discuss about it, because it's not as straightforward as it seems. It's not like, oh, there are 10 steps. Let's follow the steps to get it right. All right. So messiness, it doesn't mean that people are not doing their job well. There are good reasons why peer review is messy. So for example, messiness from the editor's perspective, editors can feel helpless And I don't know whether you believe that, but editors, because editors are always perceived as somebody with power, right? But editors are and can be at times very, very helpless. For example, editors may be searching for suitable, qualified, and most importantly, available reviewers, and all of them said no. That could be very frustrating, and that led to the delay in the review process that the authors may not be fully aware. And there may be conflicting peer review reports. One reviewer said accept, the other reviewer said reject. I mean, that's a little bit extreme, but I just want to let you know. So how does the editor reconcile the reports? Maybe there is a need to send it out to an additional third reviewer. It takes longer time. And also, how does editor deal with unprofessional peer review reports? Do they delete some of the things that the reviewers mention, or just send it out to the authors? And also sometimes editors will need to respond to authors' queries. So all these may contribute to messiness from the editor's perspective. Well, from the peer reviewer's perspective, it could also be quite messy, because sometimes peer reviewers are early career researchers. They may not have the experience in giving feedback to colleagues, to fellow researchers. What should be my tone? What should be the focus? How long? How many words? What is the format? Should I use a table or what? So there are all these questions that nobody could seem to answer. And there may be unclarity in journal standards, that you cannot find any assessment criteria on the journal's website. And you may not be very familiar with the journal submission system. So all these could contribute to messiness from the peer reviewer's point of view. The authors, of course, as we can understand very easily, experience messiness in the peer review process. Number one reason why authors feel peer review is messy because of the long peer review time. Nobody can guarantee you how long it will take. We'll say usually 3 months, maybe during COVID, a little bit longer, right? Because we all know that peer reviewers are giving up their valuable time for free to help us read our work. And especially during COVID, people have multiple roles, different responsibilities. So the time is long and we have to be patient. Sometimes the feedback is unhelpful and unprofessional. And also sometimes manuscripts are sent to a new set of reviewers. And I find this particularly problematic because it happens to revised manuscripts that the original set of reviewers agreed to review for the first time and decided not to review for the second time for whatever reason. And this will be very problematic because the new reviewers may identify new areas that the authors need to change. That, to me, is a little bit unfair to the authors, but sometimes this is the case. And of course, the rejections, the endless rejections, right? So let me just say this before we go into the scenario. So far, what we have discussed is the nature of peer review, and also 2 of my recent experiences. And we can conclude that peer review process is messy from the perspectives of the editors, the peer reviewers, and the authors. So because of this messiness, it's very important for us to think about how we can navigate. So I think the best approach for us to look at messiness, what we can do in a messy situation, is to look at some scenarios. So I have prepared 22 scenarios. Some of the scenarios are related to authors. Some of the scenarios are related to peer reviewers, and I would like to show you the scenario, and I would like you to comment in the chat how you would deal with the scenarios, and I will offer my own viewpoints at the very end. Okay, so I hope that this kind of more interactive way could help you understand what peer review is. And I know from the poll that most of you are doctoral students. There are some early career researchers. I also see some undergraduate students, which is great because you're already thinking about publishing. So I think these scenarios will be quite new to you. But if you happen to be an experienced researcher, but you're here, you're a very senior academic here, I'm sure these are very, very basic things that maybe you already know, so please bear with me. So let's start with scenarios that authors will experience. Let's take a look at the first vignette. So imagine you are a doctoral student, you have finished your research, submitted your thesis, graduated, and you intend to publish your doctoral dissertation in an academic journal. But then you're not so sure which journal to submit to. What do you do? Can you please think about it and type it in the chat? So essentially what I'm asking is, how do we decide which journal is suitable for us to submit part of our dissertation to? I know it would take a little bit of time for the chats to be processed, so I'm going to give everyone a bit of time there. Okay, thank you. I started to see some responses. Donna says, ask for supervisor's advice. Of course, that's very true, because your supervisor is supposed to know your research the best. And Jihan says, navigate the journal scope and aims. Yes, that's a very good place to start. Look at the scope and aims of the journal to see whether your study is within the remit of the journal. Yes, by chat, Jane, I mean Q&A. Sorry about that. Yes, so there is a Q&A function, and please type in the Q&A using the Q&A function. Thank you very much, Jane. And Nora says, make a list of 3 top journals I see suitable for my article. These are usually the ones I use when doing my lit review. Yes, very good. So maybe when you are doing your literature review, you are going through your reference list of your dissertation, there are journals that always appear. So that may be a very good place to start, right? And of course, from Nora's response, I also see his or her concern on publishing in reputable journals, so top journals. So even though there are a few, you may want to aim higher first, right? And then, you know, if you don't make it, you go down the ladder like that. Rachel says, look through the references. Exactly. I would recommend that would be very, very helpful. And CERA, topic and journal focus, of course. Yeah, look at the journal scope. Yes. Right. Thank you very much. A lot of responses. Thank you so much. I really like this, but it will take a while, I think, for the responses to appear. Thank you so much. Yes, I think so far I have seen 2 strategies. One is to ask supervisor. The other is to go through the reference list of your dissertation and see what journals appear most frequently. And of course, you can always go to the journal website. My advice is the same. Okay, so same as most of what you said, to read the journal aims and scope, very important. And also, if possible, read a few latest articles, latest publications in the journal, because sometimes even though your research fits the aims and scope, maybe some recent publications have addressed some aspects of your dissertation that maybe you want to try somewhere else. And of course, read your own reference list is very important. Okay, how about the second scenario here? You're still an author, so you submit your manuscript to a journal now, okay, and it has been 3 months, and you're getting impatient, okay? And your manuscript is still not under review. It's still saying awaiting reviewer assignment or awaiting reviewer selection or with editor or with editorial office, okay? What do you do? What do you do? Wait, okay. Sylvia, how long should you wait? Sylvia, what is a reasonable time frame? What do you think? Donna said send a polite query email to the editor. Okay. Where can you find an email of the editor? Wang, I kept waiting, okay, until I got the response 3.5. Okay, so in your case, it's not too bad to wait 2 more weeks and you got the reply. Okay, Wang, thank you. Yeah, maybe contact the editor. Yeah. Where can you find the email of the editor? Yeah, sending a reminder, Surah. Yes, definitely sending a reminder. And Noor, I think your response is so important. We have to think about, yes, we think we should contact the editor, but we also have to think about not just what to say, but how to say it, right? The tone, for example, we don't want to sound very pushy because as we have already discussed, there are so many reasons beyond the editor's control that delays the review process, right? So I think, yeah, I'm going to give you a thumbs up. That's really good. And Sylvia, I wait for 3 months, but more than that, I would get in touch. Yes. Okay. 3 months. It seems like to some of you, 3 months seems to be a reasonable waiting period. And after 3 months, maybe you would consider contacting the journal. And Na said sometimes the journal instruction will say how long is the normal time for them to send manuscript for review. If it is, oops, it's gone. If it is, where is that? Okay. If it is within the expected period, I will wait. If not, I will write to the editor. Thank you very much. Okay, yes, that's very true. I think especially for some journals, I think Springer, they are doing it for a while. And Taylor and Francis, they start to include such information on the journal's website to look at the average time, like for manuscripts that receive a desk rejection or manuscripts that are sent out for review. So it's all very important information. So what I will do is, I think 3 months is a reasonable time frame, and I may wait a little bit longer because of COVID. But after 3 months or so, I would write an email to the editor, and you can always find the email of the handling editor on the journal submission system. If not, you can find it on the journal's website, or sometimes you cannot find it, you can just Google the name of the editor and find his or her email. I will first explain, because the editor handles a lot of manuscripts and he or she may not understand what's the situation. We don't want the editors to go into the system and check and say, oh, this is the manuscript you're talking about. We want to explain to them, to the editor a little bit by saying, oh, this is the manuscript. It's always important to include the manuscript title and the manuscript number, submission number, and say, oh, I submitted this on a certain date and it has now been 3 months or 4 months. And I wonder what is the status of the review, or I wonder if I can have an update of the review status, very politely. Okay, ask the editor. Don't sound pushy. And I would advise only to do it if your manuscript has not moved through the pipeline for at least 3 to 4 months. So if it's under review for 3 to 4 months, I think I mean, at least for this year, I will be a little bit more patient, because we all know peer reviewers are, like everyone else, are very busy. But if it hasn't moved from like awaiting editorial process, something it's still at the very beginning of the pipeline, but it has been sitting there for a few months, it doesn't make sense. It usually does not take that long to pass the editorial check. All right. Situation 3, everyone. So imagine your manuscript submitted to a journal is desk rejected. That means without sending it out to review, without any feedback, and you would like to know why your manuscript is desk rejected. What do you do? So desk rejection, for those of you who are quite new to peer review, means the editors, after reading the manuscripts, decided not to go ahead with the peer review process because the manuscript may not be suitable for the journal. So, and then the editor will write to the authors by saying, I'm sorry, but this may not be something that we want. So this is called desk rejection. It usually takes less time than a rejection or a review outcome, sorry. Because sometimes you really want to know why it's desk rejected. And sometimes the desk rejection email, because they are mostly templates, they're quite generic, right? And they're quite short, in my experience. So if you want to get some feedback because you have prepared the manuscript for submission, you have waited, and you think that at least I could get something out of the process, right? So what would you do? And I just noticed Sura's question about what is the expected time to wait before we contact the journal. As I said in the previous slide, I would say in education, in general, 3 to 4 months. After 3 to 4 months, you can send an email to the editor and explaining your situation and asking about the status politely. Nor says contact the editor if you want some feedback. Okay. And Yoko will ask politely the reason, if at all possible, for my future learning. Okay, very good. I really like your tone. Yes, so to ask politely, because editor, if they reply and if they give you comments, they are, using their own time. Contact the editor, politely send, Molly says, politely send an email asking the editor if we can get some feedback. Yes, very good. I think sometimes, especially students, they're so intimidated. They just don't think they have the right to do it. You definitely have the right to do that, to ask. Of course, it's up to the editors whether to respond or whether to give you brief comments, or in some cases I experienced some editors would really give pretty detailed and very useful comments. So, but we do have to understand this, the reason why the desk rejection letters usually do not include very detailed comments is because some journals, especially those very reputable ones, handle a large number of submissions every year. And so editors, and most of those submissions are rejected, desk rejected, right? If you look at top journals in your field, I'm sure you can see the rejection rate, right? Over 90% or 90%, 80%. So 80% or 90% of submissions are desk rejected. And imagine if editors have to give feedback, personalized feedback to all of those submissions, it's just not possible. All right. But as I said, it is your right to write to the editor and ask politely, can I know what is the reason? I want to learn. It's for my own learning, and maybe there is something I can do to improve the manuscript. All right. So this is what I would suggest. How about this situation? So you want to publish in very reputable outlets like the SSCI journals. or some of the top journals in your own field. I'm sure you know what they are, but do not know where to start looking. What do you do? You want to know what are good journals. Probably you will have some basic ideas about what good journals are throughout your PhD. But some students, I noticed there are undergraduate students here that you may not have any research experience, and you don't know, how do I differentiate reputable, good journals or not so good journals? Where can I start looking? And I think I think what you're going to type is to go to the journal website, right? I want you to be a little bit more specific than that. So go to the journal website and then look for what kind of information. What kind of information will tell you, oh, this is a pretty good journal, right? The journals won't say, I'm a good journal, this is, I'm I'm a reputable journal. They won't say this. They will usually say they are international journals, right? But they won't really say, this is a really good one. No, but they have some information on their websites that you can use to infer the quality of the journal. What do you think is that information? Maybe speaking to colleagues and lecturers in the field. Yes, of course, you can speak with more experienced colleagues, more experienced researchers to ask for their advice, especially if they're in the same field. Look at impact factors, good. So Sylvia is talking about impact factor. For those of you who are not familiar with that, that refers to journals that are indexed in the Web of Science. And for example, in our field, it will be the Social Sciences Citation Index. So for those journals with an impact factor that people usually agree that those are pretty good ones. Of course, there is a whole debate and controversy over what defines quality of the journal, but today it's not about that. But I would just tell you what most people would say, especially in the context that I work in. So yeah, look at Web of Sciences. Also look at whether it's indexed in different databases. For example, SSCI, as I said, it's very, very reputable. Or some journals are indexed in the ESCI, the emerging sources, whatever citation, yeah, ESCI. So those are also part of Web of Science. So those are also pretty good journals. Also, some people will look at Scopus, right? Look at Scopus, their psych score, for example. So, and also you can look at the rejection rate. If you look at a journal with an acceptance rate of 90%, then don't get too excited. That may be a predatory journal, or that may be a journal that publishes almost everything they receive. Yeah, so Web of Science, look at SSCI for education, or Scopus, or look at the website of the journal and the publisher, that they will usually have the impact factor or the psych score on the website, okay? Or the ranking of the journal in that particular field. How about this? This is vignette 5. So you're looking for an academic position, right? I'm sure most of you will be if you have just finished your doctoral study or your PhD. You're looking for an academic position and would like to have a few publications under your belt, right? That's very natural. However, you realize that journal peer review takes time. It may take a year or more for your publication, for your manuscript to get published. But now you're looking for jobs. What can you do? Because you just can't push the peer review process, right? It takes several months for the comments to return, and it may take you several months to revise after reading the comments, and there may still be another round of review, right? So, but you're looking for a job right now. You want to tell your potential employers that I have a track record of publication or track record of research. What can you do? Okay, Wang said, I will let it be. Okay, everything has its own time. Okay, that's fine. That's fine, of course. If you have no pressure of looking for an academic position, or actually you're not interested in an academic position, maybe you're interested in a teaching position, or you would like to work in an institution, in the government, or something else that you may not really need publications, right? And sometimes we just have to wait for it. Yes, be patient, that's true. Okay, so what I will do is, what I would suggest is, there is this whole open science movement in education, research, and elsewhere, of course, that researchers are encouraged to publish their work without review, something we call preprint. Okay, so it's something that you have, it's something that is not reviewed, it's not accepted, but it's like the original version, and you can still publish it on some platforms like ResearchGate. And then in that way, in that case, you can always cite or include that preprint in your CV, and you can tell them it's under review, in which journal. Sometimes it's also good to mention that, oh, this preprint is currently under review in this particular journal, and it's a very reputable journal. It shows the universities that you're applying for, that you have potential, right? And they can always access it to see that, yes, you really have those publications, right? And another strategy I would suggest is to look for shorter sections of journals. Sometimes journals, big journals, they have different sections. They have the full length, 7,000 words, 8,000 words articles, of course, but sometimes they have those shorter sections like commentaries or brief reports. So you can always aim for those sections, only 3,000 words or 3,400 words. And it usually takes less time to review because they are much shorter. So for example, this is a journal that is very, very good in my field. You may not know it, but it doesn't really matter. This is a special section in that particular journal called TESOL Quarterly. So this is the research and teaching issues. So this is not full-length article. This is something like commentaries that you can submit talking about researching and teaching English language to speakers about the languages. And it's only 3,400 words. So it may be an option for you that you can, take a small part of your dissertation, for example, your lit review or your conceptual framework, and to turn it into a 3,400 words commentaries or conceptual piece. Usually shorter pieces take less time to review. All right, I'm afraid I'm going to move forward. So because I have 22, we're only in number 6. I do see some really, really good questions. So Yoko says, send abstracts for international conferences. Yes, you can also include use your publication as conference presentation materials, and conferences, the review process for conferences is usually faster. Nor asked the question, is it safe to share the work in preprint before being officially published? Now, I'm going to recommend some platforms later that are safe and legit. You also need to be very careful, although more and more journals are now accepting preprints. It's the publisher's policy. So I know more and more journals will say, yes, you can submit a preprint while your manuscript is under review, but you really have to check on the journal website whether there is, they say that you can submit preprint. If you're not sure, ask the editor. Okay, let me share a few more vignettes before we go to the reviewer side of things. In this particular situation, I'm looking at submitting an article or two to journals based on my doctoral thesis, and I'm thinking whether I should include my supervisors as co-authors. This is always something that you have to think about, because your supervisors, although they don't write your thesis, they play a big part of it. They have been helping you for 3 years, 4 years. So sometimes you're thinking, should I include? Must I include? Some people, they are really, really thinking about having single authored publications, because in some contexts, single authored or first authored publications are highly valued. So what should we do? I think the best policy is to discuss with your supervisors to see whether they are willing. Sometimes they are too busy, they may not be able to be part of it. And also, if you have agreed with your supervisors that you would like to co-author with him or her, please clarify expectations on authorship. Who is the first author? Who is the second author? And what is the responsibility of each author? So it's very, very important to communicate with your co-authors, or else people have different expectations and understanding, and sometimes it does not end well. Okay, so and I would always encourage you to publish with your supervisors, because it's always good to have a companion to walk you through the review process, especially the first time, right? How about this situation? Your manuscript receives a major revision, or some journals call it revise and resubmit, and there are comments which contradict with each other. What do? Sometimes we see different reviewers saying exactly the opposite thing. Some of you want you to cut this part shorter. Some of you want to elaborate more. What do? This is very frustrating to early career researchers, right? So my suggestion is, in your response letter, for those of you who don't know, when you submit your revision, in addition to making changes on the document, on the manuscript, you have to submit a separate response letter to indicate how you have addressed each of the comment of the reviewers. So in that particular letter, you have to highlight, explicitly say that I notice that there is such and such contradictions in the two reviewers' comments, and I note those contradictions, and then you have to explain your stance. So you can either please reviewer 1 or reviewer 2. So we have to make our stance very clear. And most importantly is, why do we choose to follow a particular reviewer's comment but not the other one? You have to be able to provide justifications, provide reasons. You cannot just say, yeah, I choose to ignore the second reviewer and only go for the first reviewer's comments. No, you have to provide clear justifications and highlight this is a contradictory area, so that the editors, when they review your letter, your revisions, they pay attention to that. And how about this situation? You disagree with some of the comments by a reviewer. Sometimes you do disagree because, we are different human beings. We have different research experiences and orientations. So can you disagree? That's the bottom line. Can you, as the author, disagree? And the good news is, yes, you can disagree, but you have to make it clear that why you disagree. You cannot just say, because I don't think this is good suggestion, or I don't believe this will work. No, you can't say this. You have to provide strong justifications. And I always encourage my students, my research students, to include citations or quotations from other very reputable sources, because while you cannot identify yourself, you can identify other authors. So maybe you're citing somebody very authoritative in your field, and he or she actually says this, so I'm going after this, but not your suggestion, right? So you are able to provide justifications. How about this? In this situation, you would like to maximize impact of your published research. And sometimes, just in journals, people may not get access, and, especially those who are not working in universities. And even though nowadays for UK universities, for example, they have the transformative publishing agreement with most of the major publishers, that if you are affiliated with a UK university, you will be able to publish your article online, open access for free. So that's really good news. But what are some of the other ways? And this actually echoed with what I said before. One of the questions by, I don't remember the name, sorry about that, where to publish your preprint. There are some good platforms, and I myself have been using ResearchGate for a while. Academia is a platform I know, but I have never used, but it's quite popular. And very recently, I started uploading preprints on OSF, the Open Science Framework. It's a very, very good platform for you to share your preprint, and something that I prefer OSF to ResearchGate because OSF will actually generate a DOI for you. And for those of you who don't know DOI, it's like an identity of your intellectual property. All right. So even before your article gets accepted and published, you actually got a DOI to go with your preprint. So it's really good. And you can see how many people have viewed it. And you can also share open data. You can share your data there as well. So OSF, Open Science Framework, do check it out. I highly recommend. And of course, another faster way to disseminate your research is through conference presentations, right? I'm sure you all know this and you have done it. Academic blogging, thinking about some of the blogs that I know, academic blogs like the LSE blog, and the conversation. These are blogs that will accept academics writing about their own experiences or their own research in a more reader-friendly and less academic way. And usually the process is quite fast. Consider disseminating your research on Twitter and your personal website, which I'm sure you all know. And this, I think this is the last vignette for authors. So you have several manuscripts under review, but you would like to let people or your potential employer know that you're research active. I think I've already covered that. There are different ways you can include your works in progress. For example, your preprints and also your work in progress in your CV. This is also very good. Even you're preparing your work, mention it. Who are you collaborating with? Which journal do you think you will submit to? It's all good information to include. So I will always encourage my students to have works in progress in your CV, right? Okay, so now let's go to, all right, before we go to peer reviewer, Nor ask a question. Is the DOI the OSF generates the same as the one the journal will? In case no, they're different. Each document online receives a unique DOI. So you will get a different DOI if your preprint is accepted by the journal. And the journal will always ask you to update your preprint so that your preprint will include a link to the published version of your paper. Okay, so no, the DOI is different. All right, so now let's go to discuss some scenarios faced by peer reviewers, because maybe some of you are reviewing, and even though you are not, maybe you're considering, or maybe you want to know what peer reviewers think. So I think it's good for us to think about it. And because I think I will talk a little bit more than I'm allowed, I think I will reserve maybe 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A, because I think throughout this interactive process, you have been asking me questions. So I'm going to eat into some of the Q&A time. So I hope I will finish at around 1:45 or 1:50, and then we will have some time for some general questions, if that's okay. So scenarios faced by peer reviewers. Let's look at this one. And this time I would like you to respond, because yeah, I would like you to think about it. So imagine you're a reviewer and you receive an invitation to review a manuscript and you're not very familiar with the topic. What do you do? So it may be your first time receiving an invitation to review. You're very excited. It's a very good journal. But then it's a topic that you're not very familiar with. What do you do? Should you accept? Because it's such a good opportunity, am I right? It's a very good journal, and you can put it on your CV, right? So, but it's not something you know very well, but maybe you can read up on the topic, right? Or should I? Candace, thank you. Ask for clarity as to why you have been asked to review. Okay. Yoko said, I write honestly that I am unfamiliar with the topic and will double check whether it would be okay for me to review such paper. Okay. Being honest is very important. CERA says, need to be clear that you're unfamiliar with the topic, but at the same time, offer your services in your field. Right. I would, yes. So this is all very nice. And we just want to let the editor know that it's not that we are not nice people. It's not that we don't like to help fellow researchers, but it may not be an area that we think we are comfortable with. And so that it's unfair to the author. My response is very straightforward: decline the invitation. You can, of course, usually the email just asks you to click accept and decline or suggest other reviewers. You don't really have a chance to express that, oh, thank you very much for inviting me. You know, you can do that in a separate email if you know who the editor is and you don't want him or her to feel bad. And I think it's an excellent opportunity to introduce yourself to the journal editor. So when you decline your invitation in that email, and you can write another email to that editor and say, thank you very much, I just received your invitation. However, I must decline even I really want to review because this is not a topic within my area of expertise. But in the future, if your journal is looking for reviewers, please consider me. And my research interests are A, B, C, D, E, and my recent publications are A, B, C, D, E, right? This is a very, very good opportunity to self-promote. It's not shameless self-promotion, it's reasonable self-promotion, okay? Next vignette, vignette 12. So you receive an invitation to review a manuscript, you recognize it is the work of your colleague, should you accept? Let me just ask you like this, so so the responses can appear faster. Should you accept? You have been asked to review a manuscript. You recognize somehow, even though the author's names are removed, somehow you know maybe your colleague has talked to you about that piece of work, or maybe you were asked to give comments on an earlier version of this submission. Should you accept? Nor said, I was once asked to review an article for a peer-reviewed journal and wasn't familiar with the topic, but still accepted. I read on that topic a lot, but of course not enough. Yes, I would say we don't really expect reviewers to be expert in that particular area. I mean, sometimes there are fields and subfields, right? Sometimes it's not 100% perfect match, but I do think we need to have some expertise in that, especially in a related area, at least in a related area. But of course, it's really good to know that you're being responsible and you read up on the topic and you comment. But to me, I think it's also important for us to ask ourselves how ready we are, because we have to be fair to the author, and we also have to be fair to the community. Because if we do not know something, we cannot detect maybe some errors or some false arguments, and it gets published, and it's not good for the scientific community as well, right? So, but I guess we are the ones who know best whether we are really we are knowledgeable enough for that particular topic. So most of you, yeah, coming back to vignette 12, no, because it's a conflict of interest. Yes, you have to decline very clearly. Please decline, and please declare conflict of interest. That's very straightforward, no room for discussion. Because for most journals in educational research, they are double blind, meaning the identities of the reviewers and the identities of the authors are unknown to each other. Let's go to 13, everyone. You accept. Now, let's move on from thinking about whether to accept to, yes, you accept an invitation to review. You anticipate you're not able to submit your report by the deadline. Then what? Because maybe when you accepted it, you thought you could finish it in 3 weeks. Usually journals give you 3 weeks or 4 weeks, I think. So you thought at the time you accepted, you could do it, but something came up this week that you are totally preoccupied. You cannot do it. What should you do? Do you pretend nothing happens and just submit when you're ready? Or you decline? You say, no, I cannot review anymore. Sorry, find another person. Or what? Do you think it's a good idea to let somebody know, maybe? And if so, who should we contact? People seem to be thinking about this. Or maybe you have never thought about this. You may never thought that we need to do something about it if we cannot submit our reviewer's report on time. So let's take a look at what I would do. I would usually, what I would recommend peer reviewers do is to request an extension. And especially nowadays, journals will understand. So, and they actually ask they actually said in their invitation letter that if you need more time, please feel free to let us know. So request an extension by writing to the journal, let them know what is a convenient time. We may not be writing to the editor, we may be writing to the editorial assistant, or at least the person handling that particular manuscript. And you will see the person's name on the manuscript submission system, and you can click on the person's name and you can request. And of course, if I were to do it, I would explain. I wouldn't just say, I need more time. Please give me 3 more weeks, but I will explain, what may be the reason, right? And I'm now seeing some responses. Thank you. Nora said we should let the editor know and ask for a few more days. It may be not a few more days. I've had reviewers asking me for a few more weeks, which if their reason is it's good, why not? Because they are using their own time. Ask for an extension, yes. And if admitted, prioritizes, yes. And Na says, usually reviewers can send email to the editor and explain the situation. Check with editor if it is acceptable for me to take a few more days. Yes, very good. And as I said, you can request a longer period of time. Of course, be reasonable. Okay, how about vignette 14, everyone? So you recommend a major revision. So you finish your review, you have written your comments, and you recommend a major revision decision for a manuscript. A few months later, you receive an invitation to review a revised version of this manuscript. This is such an important scenario. I think all of you should think about it. So I'm going to give you some time ready. What do you do? And please give me a simple yes or no. Will you accept the invitation to review a revised version of this manuscript? You review the first version and your recommendation was major revision or revise and resubmit. And a few months later, the authors have done the revision and the journal now asks you to review the revised version. Would you say yes or no? Candice says yes. All right, good. How about others? Just a simple yes, no, it's fine. If you, yes, okay, very good. I would say definitely 100% yes, if there isn't really something big that affects your commitment. If, of course, if you have something really major happening that you really cannot commit yourself, you should decline. But as an editor myself, I just find it so difficult to invite a new set of reviewers for a revised manuscript, even though we tell them in the invitation email, this is a revised manuscript, please only comment on the revisions, whether the revisions have addressed the comments. But, you know, researchers, we will have our own thinking, we will have our own viewpoints, and sometimes reviewers raise something that the first round did not cover. And I think it may not be fair to the authors because, you know, they were not asked to do that. And now it takes them another round, maybe 3 or 4 months to do another round of revision. And how about round 3? If there is a new set of reviewers, you know, it will become an endless process. So I will always encourage, and I can only encourage because I know this is free labor, reviewers to always accept. If you give a decision of reject, that's fine. Then you can say, no, I won't be reading this if it is submitted to the journal again. But if you give a decision of minor revision or major revision, you know that there is a chance that the authors will submit the revised version again. And please always say yes if you have the time. Okay, let's discuss 2 more and then I will fast forward myself. Okay. There are some discussions in the Q&A as well. So Jane says, I was asked to do this, but didn't know that I was going to be asked and so didn't have the time, but I would do it if I knew in advance. Exactly. Some journals, they will ask you after you submit your review, whether you are happy to review a revised version. So at that point, you can decide whether you would like to commit to it again. This is vignette 15 is also a very interesting situation that happened to me before. I mean, as a reviewer. So I would like to discuss this with you. What do you think? So you review a manuscript for Journal A, and it was rejected. So your decision is rejection. The other reviewer rejection. So of course it's rejected. And then sometime later, you received an invitation from Journal B to review the exact same journal, exact same manuscript. You can see the same title, same abstract, same structure, almost, you know, everything is almost the same. What do you do? Yeah. I really want you to think about this. Will you review it? Or if you say you are going to review it, are there any concerns? Or are there things that we have to pay attention to when we review the manuscript again? Well, of course, some of you may be thinking about ethical issues. Of course, there is nothing unethical about it, right? Because the manuscript was rejected by the journal, so the authors can submit it to any journal, right? Because the only unethical thing is that we submit the same manuscript to more than one journal at the same time, right? Because we're wasting people's time, we're wasting resources, so that's not ethical. But here, I don't think it's an issue of being ethical or not. But to me, I think it has to do with honesty and clarity. So we just want to make it clear after we accept. I think you can accept if you want to, or you know, it's up to you. There is no reason why you should not accept. If you accept and decide to review the same manuscript, we have to make it clear to the editor, just as a piece of information in your reviewer's report, to say that I have reviewed it before. And so you just have to make it clear so that other people can can understand that something happened before this round of review. And from my experience, what I experienced is I received the same manuscript, no revision done. Okay, so the authors, they received comments from me and another reviewer, and they decided to not make any changes and submit to another journal. And it was me who was one of the reviewers. So I would, of course, you can imagine that I would not be very happy with the manuscript, and I would be saying the same thing that I said before, that the changes are needed to be made. All right. And now, because of time, I'm going to fast forward. I'm sorry. So vignette 16, you're reviewing a manuscript. The author makes some grammatical mistakes. Do you take it seriously? Do you focus on the grammatical mistakes and make a scene out of it? Well, this is something you may have read on Twitter already, that remember, your role is a peer reviewer. You're not a proofreader. All right. And remember, your role is not to correct every language error you can spot. No, that's not your job. And if there are errors, and there are bound to be errors because people make mistakes, all of us make mistakes, let it go, let it be. If the errors do not impede your understanding, just some very general comments to ask the authors to proofread their work. Okay, just ask them to pay attention to certain language features, maybe. Just a very, very polite reminder. Never make any uninformed judgment, like find a native speaker to proofread. Then you are making assumption, right? So that's unnecessary in the review process. Vignette 17, so you are reviewing a manuscript. The author does not cite some works which you think are important. For example, you have done some great work in that area, or your supervisor, and you think, well, you should have cited those. What do you do? Of course, we have to think carefully why you would like to cite those works, because sometimes the reason may be for personal gain, or so we have to think about, is this something that really would contribute or strengthen the arguments in the manuscript? Okay, so always recommend but not demand. So I'm going to stop here, although there are a few vignettes left, but I would just end with the last two vignettes, maybe. Okay, so as a conclusion of this presentation, so we have talked about different scenarios, different cases. The message, as I said earlier, is it's a very messy process. And I hope today, through a case study approach, you understand a little bit more about the process. It's very hard to generalize experiences, but I can only share with you cases. The best way to experience and to learn from journal peer review is to become part of it. So please consider becoming a peer reviewer. And sometimes, and a lot of the time these days, journals are looking for reviewers. So they are calling for reviewers, or maybe your supervisors know that is an editor, and or he or she are looking for reviewers. You can always be proactive. All right, you can always be proactive. Write to editors, or you meet somebody in conference, you can ask them. All right, and sometimes you may say, yes, I want to become a reviewer, but I just feel like I don't know how to do it. How do I write a reviewer report? There are different resources there that I would like to recommend to you. The first resource is F1000. This is an open peer review platform. So there are journals on this platform, and they adopt open peer review, meaning all the peer review reports are there. You can access the reports. You can know who the reviewers are, who the authors are. This is called an open model of peer review. So you can learn from the peer review reports. So you can see the layout is something like this. You can see the reviewer's name. You can see that you can see the report itself. So you can learn from the examples. Of course, almost all of the major publishers, they have their peer reviewer training resources. So they may be text, there may be videos or short courses, or samples or PowerPoint slides. So you can look at their peer reviewer training courses, okay? So you can also take a look. And of course, me being part of the scholarly peer review Twitter, account together with Shannon Mason from Nagasaki University, that we have collated a lot of resources, a lot of information for peer reviewers. So we have recently updated our website, so you can follow us on Twitter and look at the resources on our website to get more information about peer review. Okay, so just to conclude, as I said, peer review is a messy process, and the best way to do it is to become an insider. All right. And I know some of you, what you're thinking, receiving training is so important. I have to be fully trained before I can do this. But getting emotional support is equally important. So you don't want to face the trauma. Sometimes there's trauma alone. You want to find support from your peers and your supervisors. And finally, I think it's so important. People always talk about the technicality, but it's so simple. It's peer review is communication. And good communication means respect, mutual respect, understanding, kindness. It's something we are doing in our everyday communication. If you can do that in peer review, you will experience very, very positive experiences. Thank you very much, everyone. I know I have overrun. I hope there are 7 more minutes. I hope it's fine. Thank you so much, everyone.
Oh, sorry, I had a problem with my video. Thank you very much. This has been a wonderful, very informative and very interactive presentation, Sinwang, and very useful hands-on case studies as well, that I'm sure our audience today have responded really well. We have like a long list of responses to each vignette. And I think that also allows some sort of reflection on the process as well. And that gives like some sort of a feeling of being part of the process, because like those kinds of situations are very useful to share for sure. I don't think that we have the time for questions, but I did have a question, and perhaps like just a short answer, but I had a question that I was interested myself to know. Putting your only work for the putting your only work as a PhD student, for example, or still a postgraduate student, you haven't published before. So putting your work ahead on the open science framework, for example, or any of the open access kind of websites and things like that. What is your take on that? Is this something that is worth the risk for an ECR or a PhD student? This could be their only only publication first and perhaps only publication at this very, very early stage of the academic career. Is it worth wait? Is the wait worth the time, or is it important to put the publication for open access for the time being until a more suitable opportunity comes up?
Okay, Jihan, if I understand correctly, so when you say open access, it's not open access journals, right? You're talking about preprints.
Yeah.
Okay. I think as a doctoral student,
for the preprints, this is what I meant.
For the preprint. All right. Yeah. I mean, if you are completing your PhD, I think there may be problematic areas about whether you can put part of your thesis, unfinished thesis, online, right? That may be tricky, and I would always encourage you to discuss with your supervisors. And when I think about thesis, I think we want to put something out there that is quality assured. So if we don't know what the best would look like, but at least we have reviewed them, people have reviewed them, and then we put them out there. So even though we say the preprints are not peer reviewed, but they are peer reviewed actually, because by your supervisors, by your examiners, right? So I would always encourage PhD students to do that, especially after you finish your PhD and maybe you're reshaping your thesis into shorter papers. I don't think you should put your whole thesis out there. I think there will be copyright issue or something like that. I'm not sure, but we don't want to go down that track. But maybe when you're reshaping and you have that short versions of papers, which are read by your supervisors, put them out there for others to comment. I mean, of course, there won't be a messaging function on the open access platform, but people get to read your work. They talk about your work. You see your work being tweeted. You know, that is a very good process. And I would only say this: upload the part that you're the most proud of. It's like the
Yeah, it does make
strongest.
sense.
Yeah.
Indeed. Thank you very much. I'm very aware of time. Thank you very much, Sinwang, for a very, very informative session. We have great feedback in the chat box as well about how people are happy with the information that you and the experience that you've shared with them today. I would just like to remind you that we will take if you have any questions, you'd like to put them in the chat box before we close the session, or for the questions that have been asked but we didn't have the time to answer today. We should follow this session with a podcast or a blog post from our guest speaker today, Dr. Sinwang, and we do thank you in advance for giving us the time and contributing to our ECR community. So I think we're coming to an end now, so I'd like to thank all the attendees. Thank you very much for your time today, and hopefully we were useful to you today in our last session of the academic publication seminar webinars. Sorry, and thank you, Sinwang, for your time today, and we hope to see you perhaps in our next year webinar series. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jihan. Thank you, everyone.